Okay, so if you've seen the trailers or posters for this movie, Dolittle, you may be asking yourself some very serious philosophical questions like, what the hell? Or who decided this was a good idea? Or why is Robert Downey Jr. in this? Well, the good news is that by answering that last question, we can pretty much answer the rest as well. Apparently, Robert Downey Jr. was the main reason why this movie was made in the first place, the main driving force behind it. He was a big fan of the Dolittle books as a kid, and he wanted to make a sweet and funny movie that his young children could enjoy now. And when you're Robert Downey Jr. coming off of a 10-year streak as the main star of Marvel, well, you can do whatever the fuck you want. You've got the connections and the money and the trust of the studios. So, despite the fact that the previous attempts at adapting Dolittle were, well, not very successful. In fact, the first one back all the way back in 1960s nearly bankrupted the studio. Despite all of that, somehow Universal has agreed to make Dolittle again. Both Downey and his wife were producers on this, so they both kept the project close to their hearts, which doesn't make it pleasant for me to have to report that I have found the finished product to be rather atrocious. There were some early signs of this coming. The trailers didn't look so great, and the movie was dumped to a January release, which typically means the studio doesn't have a lot of faith in it, financially speaking. And then there were also reports of numerous rewrites and reshoots after poor initial test screenings. So overall, the prognosis looked bleak. And the reality is pretty much that. It's a mix of live action actors and CG animals that occasionally look alright, but a lot of the time stand out as poorly animated. The story is that Dolittle is a doctor that can talk to animals. However, after the death of his beloved wife in a sea catastrophe, he has been living pretty much as a reclusive hermit. One day, a boy comes by his place with a squirrel that he unintentionally shot and now wants cured. And coincidentally, at the same time, a girl also comes by, sent by the Queen of England. The Queen is deathly sick, and Dolittle has to set off with his crew of animals and the newly met boy to find a mythical island on which there is a mythical tree that grows mythical fruits that can cure every disease. But they also have to hurry because the Queen will die if nothing is done by the time of the upcoming solar eclipse, because that somehow has a connection to the poison that was used to make her ill. Now, yeah, I know this all sounds absolutely ridiculous and nonsensical and stupid and contrived, but that's what the story is throughout the entire movie. Now, listen, there is something called suspension of disbelief, and I'm perfectly fine with oversimplified plot points or fantasy elements, but the movie or a book or whatever else needs to have some sort of internal logic to it. It's fine if the rules of the story are not realistic, but once you establish those rules, you better follow them. The film gives no impression of the willingness to follow any rules. Logic is non-existent. Things just happen because that's the outline of the script. The events don't naturally flow from one to another. Often it's just, okay, we need this character at this place at exactly this moment, so they will just magically teleport here with no explanation. Everything feels artificial and made up, and so because of that, there are also no stakes. I'll give you an example, okay? We have established that time is of the essence because we need to save the Queen. And through the entire movie, she's just lying in bed. And there is even a prolonged period of time where we stop switching over to her perspective to see what's new. Well, she's still lying in bed, obviously. But at the beginning, we get a few shots of her, then nothing. And then at the very end, suddenly, the eclipse is starting. We switch perspective to Dolittle again and the crew doing their thing on the other end of the world. Then switch back to the Queen. The eclipse is now almost in full after what seems like 10 minutes have passed. And then Dolittle and the rest of the people, or the rest of the animals, just show up. Like that. It's bad logistics, but more importantly, it's just bad narration. There are other problems as well. The score is forgettable, the pacing is completely off, and so I was often bored. The problem that Dolittle has to resolve in the final act in order to get to the fruit is so childishly stupid that I felt insulted watching it. I mentioned the CG animals already, but the live actors are not much better. Antonio Banderas and Michael Sheen, yes, they both are in it, are doing their best showing the scenery, but the rest of the cast, my god, the two child actors are utterly terrible. Jessie Buckley spends the entire film lying in bed as the queen, pretending to be asleep and sickly, but despite the fact that she's in full makeup, looking as healthy and as gorgeous as ever. The biggest mystery to me, though, acting wise, is what the hell was Downey thinking? He's doing a Welsh accent for whatever reason, but he's also pretty much acting like a homeless drug addict most of the time. He's half incomprehensible, just mumbles his way through the film, creating this bizarre character that doesn't make any sense. His Dolittle is completely unlikable. I guess that's part writing, part his acting. But in any case, I never bought his character. I never sympathized with him. I guess the closest comparison that comes to mind would be Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow in the last Pirates movie, when he's a shadow of his former self, just going all the way to 11 on the scale of crazy, forgetting everything else. It's a caricature of itself, and I was really disappointed by Downey because we know he can be a good actor. And especially knowing that context, that it was a passion project for him. At the end of the day, I left the theater wondering mostly who this movie was made for, apart from Downey's kids, of course. I clearly wasn't the target audience for it, but I guess maybe if you have a 5-year-old kid, they would like it if they're small enough to ignore the glaring stupidity of the plot and just, be distracted by the CG animals for an hour and a half. But then again, there are better options even for 5-year-olds, especially options where as the adult you'll also get to enjoy yourself at least a little bit. Dolittle is not that.